welcome Dr. Lee for our next presentation.
Hello. Whenever I go to talks, I try to copy down expressions that I'm going to use later on. I got some expressions from the first speaker, Dr. Eschelstein, and also from Dr. Haas. I got a very interesting expression I wanted to use. I have to preface this. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. And when he spoke about the technique of enucleating a cow ovum and then inserting the nucleus of this doctor's sperm, he spoke of mixing cow mitochondrial material with a person's DNA. Well, if you come from Texas, that has a familiar ring to it. You know, I could just hear someone from Texas talk about, well, doctor, you just got cow mitochondrial mixed in with your DNA, I think. So I want to use that one later on. Watching television and reading the major news magazines, one might get the impression that the abortion issue and the whole controversy about the status of the human embryo in the context of discussions of stem cell research and so on, one might get the impression that this is another example of the clash between science and religion. One might get the impression that the problem arises because the religious people believe that human beings have spiritual souls, and it's the science, and the other people, the people on the other side, are sticking to the scientific facts strictly. Well, the actual truth is very different. In fact, the actual truth is close to the reverse. While we do believe that human beings, that is, while Christians do believe that human beings have spiritual souls, that is simply not the issue in the debate about the status of human embryos. It really doesn't arise. Rather, the issue is whether human beings have bodies, not whether they have souls. It is the people on the other side, the pro-abortion side, the people who deny the intrinsic value of human embryos, who are identifying the self with something different from the body, treating the body, divorcing the self from the body, treating the body as something alien and as a mere extrinsic tool. And so we are on the other side who are rising up and saying and defending the basic truth, the truth that we really have to go into, is that human beings are bodily beings. The body is a part of the self. It's not a mere extrinsic tool. And so that's one of the issues, that's one of the fundamental truths I want to hit on today, is that it's, Dr. Eschelstein had also hit on this, that it's our bodiliness, the body. We are living physical organisms. And if we stick to that truth, if we hit on it, if we bring that out and support that, and then with some other truths, some other basic moral truths, then I think we can show, well, the human embryo is identical with the thing which is going to walk and talk and paint pictures if he or she is not killed. So what I'd like to do is first present the basic argument, the basic, very brief, short argument to show that the human embryo, from day one, from zygote stage on, does have intrinsic human dignity, and then go back and look at three objections to that, or three attempts to evade or escape from that argument. The presupposition, I think, the presupposition I want to make, and I think it's a safe one, is that it's wrong to kill adult human beings. It's wrong to kill you and me. It's wrong for me to kill you. It's wrong for you to kill me. That, of course, is a presupposition that you can make. That most people will make it. If they're not going to make that, then you can't discuss it. Given that presupposition, then I think there are four steps in the argument. Number one, and I'm going to try to just to express this fairly clearly. Number one, what is intrinsically valuable, what it is that makes it wrong to kill you or to kill me, is, in other words, what is intrinsically valuable so that it's wrong to kill you or wrong to kill me, is what I am. It's not some properties, not some characteristics, not some experiences that I have, but it's the thing that you are and the thing that I am, the substantial entity that you or I are. That's step number one. So, what is valuable is what I am. That's step number one. Step number two, what I am is a human physical organism. I don't have an organism, I don't have a body, it's not a possession, I don't inhabit this. The body is part of what I am. I am a living, breathing, walking, talking body. Of course, with other spiritual side, but it's a living body. So, first step, what is intrinsically valuable is what I am. Secondly, what I am is a physical organism. Third step, biology tells us that the physical organism comes to be at conception or at fertilization, or by some kind of lab technique can occur at cloning, if human cloning should occur. But whenever there is the joining of the DNA from the sperm and the ovum so that you have a full complement of genetic material and it actively developing itself, that's when you have a new human organism. That's not something that's not something that's highly debated. That's something that when you consult the embryology books, almost every embryology book you consult will open up and say, well, the beginning of the human individual is when the DNA from the sperm and the DNA from the oocyte join, and from that moment on you have the beginning of a new human individual, a new human organism. No one would deny that if it weren't socially convenient to do so. So that's the third step. The fourth step, well, it follows from that the fourth step is that you can just draw the conclusions from those. Number one, let's go back, review. Number one, what is intrinsically valuable is what I am. Number two, what I am is a human physical organism. Number three, the human physical organism comes to be at conception, and it follows logically that what is intrinsically valuable then comes to be at conception. So the basic argument is that what makes it wrong to kill you is what you are. But what you are is a physical organism. The physical organism began at conception, therefore what's intrinsically valuable began at conception. So I want to look at that now. I want to go further and look at three ways to avoid that. Let me note, before I go on, that the argument here is those three steps. That third step, the physical organism comes to be at conception, that's what biology tells us. And that's what biology has been telling us for about 100 years. So the science is on our side. It's not religion versus science. The science, all of the scientific evidence indicates that the physical organism comes to be at conception. So if you want to escape that conclusion that these are valuable things, you're going to have to bring in some philosophical argument to say, well, it's human, it's granted, it's a human organism, but it's not a person. But that's not science. That's something else. That's I think, a bad philosophical argument, but it's not science. What the science tells us, and what science has been telling us for 100 years, is that the human organism, look at the member of an individual, complete, though immature member of the human species, begins at conception. Well, there are three, I think, basically three arguments I want to look at to try to evade that. You could deny any of those steps. The first way would be to try to deny step one. Perhaps the most popular argument to deny the intrinsic value of human embryos you could call the no person argument. According to this argument, the human embryo or fetus is a human being, a human organism, yes, but it is not a person. The argument is that only persons deserve moral respects, but these, while they are human organisms, are not persons. Sometimes it is argued that human embryos are not persons because human embryos do not have mental functions. For example, Marianne Warren argued, in her article has been reprinted in several philosophy anthologies, argued that in order to be a person, an entity must have consciousness, or self-motivated activity, or the capacity to communicate an indefinite variety of signs or messages, or the presence of self-concepts. And if an entity has none of these, she says it is not a person. Michael Tooley, the famous Australian philosopher, or one of the famous Australian philosophers, I should say, argued that in order to be a person, an entity must have self-consciousness. Self-consciousness in the sense of a concept of himself as a continuing subject of experiences. Now, both Marianne Warren and Michael Tooley then argued that because human embryos do not have such mental functions, that therefore they are not persons. Such arguments, of course, do have some plausibility. It is obvious that it is morally permissible to destroy some things, but not others. It is obvious, or at least it seems obvious, that it is permissible to kill lettuce, say, or grass, or at least some trees, but not other things. I may have to revise that sentence if I ever publish this thing. Where one does draw the line, where does one draw the line between the things that is okay to kill and things that is not okay to kill? Well, a long tradition would say that you draw it at persons. But what is a person, one might argue, but a thing that is self-conscious, that has rationality, that has the ability to consciously direct his or her own life? However, this argument is mistaken. The argument, the whole no-person argument. The argument implicitly identifies the human person with a consciousness and looks at the body as something that one uses, as an extrinsic tool one uses or inhabits. Whereas in fact, human persons are particular kinds of physical organisms. Their argument is, the argument that I just quoted before, is that yes, the human organism comes to be at conception. In other words, you have the human organism there, yes, but you don't have I there. You don't have a person there yet. Well, that is, of course, implicitly saying that yes, the human organism is there, but I'm not there. That means what I am is something different from a human organism. If the human organism can come to be at one time, but I or you come to be at a different time, it follows that I or you are different things than human organisms. But that is a mistake. You and I are essentially physical organisms. And so, as I will argue, then, since we are essentially physical organisms, then you and I came to be when these physical organisms came to be. First of all, I think, at least on one level, we have an immediate awareness that we are physical, living bodies. When I take a shower, I say that I am washing myself. If you strike my face, I do not say, oh, you hit my body, I say, you hit me. If, while walking past a vase on a coffee table, I accidentally knock it over, I do not say, oh, my body did that, but I say, oh, I'm sorry, I knocked over that vase. So there's in some sense an immediate awareness. But the second argument is that you can see that we are bodily things by the actions we perform. And this argument, the argument here is actually drawn from Thomas Aquinas, except modified a little bit. First of all, if you look at the actions of sensing or perceiving, the kinds of actions that we know that other animals perform. I mean, now granted, human beings are distinct from other animals. Right now we want to show how they have something in common with other animals. Like other animals, they are bodily as well as they are bodily. And that human beings have, in addition to being bodily, they also have a spiritual side to them. But similar to other animals, we perceive, we sense. We we sense with our eyeballs. We perceive with our brains. So sensing is a bodily action. Therefore, the thing that senses, or the thing that perceives, must be a bodily thing. You look at, you know what a thing is like through the actions it performs. Now, if sensing is a bodily thing, and we sense, it follows that we are bodily things. Now, the thing that senses has to be the same thing as the thing that understands. Now, the people who want to say, well, I'm just a mind, and maybe have a body, those people want to say, well, what I mean by I, according to those people, what I mean by I is the thing that understands. Well, yes, I understand that, and I have self-consciousness. And then they want to say, well, I'm not a body, I have a body. But it has to be the same thing that understands and that performs the act of sensing. When you say, well, that wall is brown, Well, that wall is brown. When you say that wall, that thing, the word that signifies what you are grasping through your senses, which is a bodily action. And then when you say, well, it's a wall, you grasp what the word wall means through your understanding. So when you say something like, when you understand that is a wall, it has to be the same thing, the same subject that performs the act of sensing, by which you grasp the word that, and that performs the act of understanding, by which you grasp what is meant by the word wall. And therefore, what is referred to by the word I, or you, which would be the source or the thing that understands, has to be the same thing, the same agent, the same subject as what performs the act of sensing, which is a bodily thing. So that argument, I think, then shows that we are bodily entities. We're living bodily things. We have spiritual souls, or a spiritual side to us. That's the source of understanding. But that's not all of us. That's only an aspect of us. We walk and we knock vases over on tables, and I guess you know that's probably something I did recently. But those are bodily things, therefore we are bodily things. Well, that's an important truth, because what that means is that we can't say, okay, yes, the human organism began, oh, but the person didn't. Because what the person is, what the human person is a bodily organism. Now, if the human person, if that's what it is, then when the human person began, when that human bodily organism began. And so the argument that, yes, they're human organisms, but they're not persons, is mistaken. A second attempt to deny the intrinsic value of human embryos is to deny the second step in the argument I gave above. The second step, or I'm sorry, it would be the first step. The first step in the argument I gave above. The first step in the argument was that it's what I am that is intrinsically valuable. It's not the case that I came to be at one point, but became intrinsically valuable at the second point. Now, this argument is this position, this attempt or this evasion, is close to the first one, but it is different. It sounds like the first one, but I think it's importantly different. This argument, the second attempt, concedes that you and I once were human embryos. And so proponents of this view do not identify the self or the person with a non-physical consciousness. So this argument then is distinct from the first one that I gave, which was identifying the self with just a pure consciousness. What the second view says is that the word person is like an accidental attribute. It's somewhat like the word or the term basketball player. Now, just as you came to be at one point, but then you might have become a basketball player later on, so they say, you and I came to be when these physical organisms came to be, but we became persons only sometime later. In other words, what they mean by person is not the thing that I am, but it's the thing with a certain attribute. And it's only when it has that attribute that it's a person. Thus, unlike the first objectors, the second position admits that you and I once existed in our mother's wombs. They admit that the thing referred to by I or you is a physical organism. What they deny is that this entity was intrinsically valuable at every stage of its duration. They concede that you and I once were human embryos and fetuses, but they hold that you and I only acquired intrinsic value at a later time in our life. You could say that the first view disagrees with us on a metaphysical or ontological position. The second one disagrees on an ethical position. Proponents of this argument agree that there is just one thing that began its existence in the mother's womb, but what they say is that it became intrinsically valuable only much later. Now, my reply to this argument is as follows. Obviously, proponents of this view cannot maintain that the accidental attribute, they want to say that it's not just what you are that makes you a person. You have to have what you are. You have to have the thing that you are. But then you also have to have some additional accidental attributes, some other attributes such as maybe the development of self-consciousness or the development of certain desires or some kind of mental functions in addition to being just what you are. But the that additional attribute cannot be an act. It's obvious that that cannot be an act or an actual behavior, because they certainly do not want to say that people who are in a deep sleep or people who are in reversible comas are not persons. So the additional attribute will have to be a capacity or potentiality of some sort. Thus, adult sleeping human individuals will be persons, on their view, because they have the potentiality or capacity for mental functions of some sort. But there is a sense in which human embryos and fetuses do have a capacity or potentiality for such mental functions as soon as they come to be. Now, granted, there's a sense in which they don't, but right now I want to indicate that there's a sense in which they do. Human embryos and fetuses cannot, of course, immediately perform such actions. They can't right now. In other words, they cannot, in the next few seconds, reason or make free choices. Still, they are related to such actions differently than, say, a canine or a feline embryo is. They, that is, human embryos, are members of a natural kind, are members of a biological species, whose members, if healthy and not meeting some accident, in due course do develop the immediately exercisable capacity for mental functions. Now, the fact that they do develop that immediately exercisable capacity regularly and predictably shows that they have within themselves the internal resources to actively develop themselves to the point where they have that immediately exercisable capacity. They have in themselves what it takes to develop themselves to the point where they will perform those actions. So, in effect, then, we must distinguish two sorts of capacity or two sorts of potentiality for mental functions. First, immediately exercisable capacity, that is, one that the entity will immediately perform in response to a stimulus. Second, the capacity to develop oneself to the point where one does perform such actions. Now, on what rational basis or what non-arbitrary basis can one require the first sort of potentiality, as do proponents of the second objection? And this first sort of potentiality is an accidental attribute, and not settle for the first, which is possessed as part of what one is. In other words, there are these two different kinds of capacities, granted, but why require the first and not just the second? There are two reasons against requiring the first. There are two reasons why I think the second kind, the kind that you have just as part of what you are, should be enough. First, the difference between the first and second types of potentiality is only a difference between stages along a continuum. That is, the real difference between the first and second types of potentiality is a matter of degree rather than of kind. The proximate or immediately exercisable capacity for mental functions is the development of an underlying potentiality that the entity has simply because it is the kind of thing that it is. Between the embryo's capacities and the same capacities of the same being in their developed actualization, in that being's adult life, there is only a difference in degree, a difference of more or less along the same line. The capacity for reasoning and making free choices is gradually developed or brought towards maturation through gestation, childhood, adolescence, and so on. But the difference between a person and a non-person, or that which has value as a subject of rights and that which does not, cannot consist only in the fact that, while both have some feature, one has more of it than the other. No one should seriously claim that a mere quantitative difference, that is, having more or less of the same feature, such as the development of a natural capacity, can by itself be the basis, or should be the basis, for why we should treat different entities in radically different ways. In other words, the difference between these two types of potentialities is only a difference in degree. But the ontological difference between beings we treat as persons versus beings we do not treat as persons should not be just a matter of difference in degree, it should be a difference in kind. Between the ovum and the approaching thousands of sperm on the one hand, and the embryonic human being on the other hand, there is a clear difference in kind. But between the embryonic human being and that same human being at any stage of her maturation, there is only a difference in degree. It follows that human beings are subjects of rights, or from the moment they come to be, and not only after they have developed some degree, they have to some degree brought some or all of their basic natural capacities to development. A second reason against this is requiring the development of the capacity is that once you say that some degree of development of this natural capacity is required rather than just having the natural capacity itself, then since there are degrees, there are infinite degrees of this development, it will follow that some people will be more equal than others. In other words, if persons were valuable as subjects of rights only because of such accidental qualities and not in virtue of what they are, since such qualities come in varying degrees, it would follow that different people would be more persons than others. And so the fundamental truth that all persons are equal in their rights, have equal value, would be thrown out the window. Finally, a third attempt to deny the intrinsic value of human embryos has gained popularity more recently with the advent of discussion about stem cell research and the possibility of cloning human beings. Here, some have argued that human beings are not even complete human organisms. It has been argued that cloning shows that each of our somatic cells, for example a skin cell, has the potentiality, given the right circumstances, of developing into a mature adult human being. But if that is true, so the argument goes, then that means that you cannot argue that human embryos are persons on the ground that they have some kind of potentiality. As an Australian bioethicist, I don't mean to pick on Australians, they just happen to be the ones that come up, Julian Savulescu said, quote, "If all our cells could be persons, then we cannot appeal to the fact that an embryo could be a person to justify the special treatment we give it." This has become a very popular argument. That, well, we can clone any human. We can clone any of our cells. If we can clone any of our cells, that means any of our cells could grow to maturity. So they're in the same boat as a human embryo. The argument is fallacious, however. The proposed analogy between somatic cells and human embryos is false. First, the kind of potentiality possessed by each of our cells differs profoundly from the potentiality of the human embryo. In the case of somatic cells, each has a potential only in the sense that something can be done to it so that its constituents, its DNA molecules, enter into a distinct whole organism. In other words, they can't become mature human beings. Their constituents can be used to generate another human being, but they themselves are not whole human organisms already. In the case of a human embryo, on the other hand, he or she already has the potentiality to actively develop herself to, or him herself or herself, to the further stage of maturity of the same kind of organism he or she already is. It is true that the whole genetic code is in each somatic cell, and this code can be used for guidance of the growth of a new entire organism. But this point does not show that the potentiality is the same as that of a human embryo. In cloning, the nucleus of an ovum is removed, and a somatic cell is placed in the remainder of the ovum and given an electrical stimulus. Such acts do more than bring out the latent potentialities of a cell, or merely place a cell in a new environment. The somatic cell is unable to produce a new embryo by itself, but must work together with an enucleated ovum. Unlike the new embryo, it needs more than just the right environment to develop to the mature stage of a human embryo. A mature stage of a human being. A change in environment is merely external, but the result of cloning is an entirely new organism. There is an internal change in the kind of thing present. Now, the evidence for the fact that there's a new kind of thing present is as follows: the new direction of its activities and reactivities, or reactions. The basic difference here, and the thing to bring out about the biological evidence, is that regularly and predictably the various cells within a human organism cooperate with each other to produce a new, a more mature, I should say not new, but a more mature human being in the stage of its growth. That shows that from the beginning, that is, from the stage of zygote on, these various cells are communicating with each other or interacting with each other and cooperating as parts of one whole organism. None of that, of course, is true of any of our somatic cells unless they are detached from us, joined with the mitochondrial material of some ovum, and then sparked. In other words, then in that case, then you have a new organism. You generated a new human organism, but not until then. So that last argument, I think, is sort of blowing smoke rings. It ignores the evidence. It's true that the fact that the human embryo has the genetic code typical of human beings shows that it is human. But that's only one part of the evidence to show that it is a distinct human individual. Another set of evidence shows that it's not just human, but also distinct from the mother or the father. And still another set of evidence shows that it's not functionally a part of a larger organism, but it's actively developing itself, functioning as a whole, complete, although immature, human organism. So in sum, let me go back to the argument here. What we are is a human physical organism. Secondly, we are intrinsically valuable or subject of rights in virtue of what we are, not just because of characteristics that we acquire at some point in our life. Therefore, from the moment that human organisms comes to be, which is at conception, or at the generation of a new organism by some lab technique, from that moment on, we come to be, and there is a subject of rights from that moment on. Thank you. John Haas bragged it's 29 minutes. I got it 32, but close, sorry. I think, Richard, you had your...
In the congressional debate, there's a newfound popularity to the argument that embryo does not really begin life as a human being until the time it is implanted in the womb. That life begins in the womb, not in the petri dish. I wonder if you could address that as an objection to.
Yeah, the question was, he said that there's this new popularity of the argument that human life does not begin until the embryo is implanted in the womb, and they have the slogan that life begins in the womb, not in a petri dish. We've been saying life should begin in the womb, but I think the facts just show biologically you have from that you have the differentiation. Once they produced a zygote in Petri, then there's the growth of this zygote from, say, 2 cells to 4 cells to 6 to 8 cells. And that's a regular growth. It's absolutely predictable. Unless something happens to this organism to sort of divide it, unless the zona pellucida, which holds the cells together, is in some way ruptured during the process, this embryo the various cells of this embryo will interact together to produce a singular, unitary, more mature human organism. And so all of the biological evidence indicates that it right now is functioning as, the various cells are functioning as parts of one whole. And the whole point of the thing, that nothing can happen when it becomes implanted to kind of internally change it and make it into a new kind of thing. That's the whole point that was the whole point of generating it outside to begin with. So I think there's a massive dose of forgetfulness. The whole point of doing the thing was to get something human that we could implant. And so in other words, to go back, I think the biological evidence indicates that there's growth, there's homeostatic functions being performed by this organism as a whole. that indicate that it is functioning as a unitary organism, and of course it has to be the kind of organism that it is a human organism. I don't know if there's probably more to add to that, but everything that you would expect a embryo to do at this stage, it's doing. And then you just put it in the right place, and it begins to implant. It can't implant until it gets down in the uterus anyway. So I mean, it's just, you know, if you put anybody out in some weird situation, they're going to do what they can. And then you put them back into their their friendly environment, and they start doing much better. But that seems to me what's happening with the human embryo. I mean, the human embryo is growing, does remarkably well. I don't think any of us would do very well in that situation. But it grows from what? It grows from 1 cell to 8 cells, and then now actually they implanted at 8 cells, or do they sometimes implant it later?
Probably about 100 cells.
100 cells. Okay. Up to 100. Yeah. Well, that's doing. I mean, that's a lot more than any of us. None of us is going to multiply ourselves, 100 times. None of us is going to. In other words, they have manifested a remarkable growth between their beginning and the time that they are implanted, and all of that is indication that and all of that are the kinds of functions that have to be done by the organism as a whole, not by the cells working independently. The other thing is, of course, implanting. How could implanting the organism in the utero somehow then cause this multiplicity of cells to become one? I mean, there's no cause there to bring the multiplicity of cells into unity.
Given that the structure of a human embryo to collect stem cells for research is immoral, can you talk about use of these existing cell lines, like what President Bush was sort of, it's okay to do an immoral thing after this date, but not before this date. So if you can sort of elaborate on the use of existing cell lines for research.
The question is,
destruction.
The question was, can I elaborate on the distinction that President Bush made between using existing stem cells versus creating new embryos and dissecting those embryos? Well, as I understand it, I could be wrong on factual, and I'll ask Richard about this. As I understand it, what he was talking about was not the destruction of an embryo that is, in other words, the destruction has already occurred. And as I understand it, he's talking about using the stem cells that have already been obtained by dissecting human embryos in the past. And so it was not to be permitted to destroy any other embryos, at least on this with governmental funding. And I guess you wanted to know about what I think about the morality. What I was talking about was the moral status of the human embryo. So it's immoral to dissect a human embryo in order to obtain its body parts. That's simply immoral. Now, it's another question, if someone has already dissected the human embryo, that was an immoral act. If someone has already done that, is it immoral for me to use the information or to use the stem cell that they obtained from that? The stem cell, of course, is not the same as a human embryo. The stem cell is the body part that they got when they chopped the human embryo up. That's not necessarily. I mean, that's not necessarily immoral. It's not cooperation either, because you're not assisting their act of killing if the killing has already taken place. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do, but I don't see it as intrinsically immoral. I don't see it as intrinsically immoral to use the body parts of someone that has been murdered. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a. I mean, there's a whole big can of worms there, but I'm trying to be very precise about what the issue is. The question is not whether it's politically right to fund that. That's another issue. I mean, whether that's the right thing to do, but it's not the same thing as intentionally killing a human embryo. It's a question of whether it's using the body parts of an embryo that has been killed. Okay. Yeah, I don't know whether, that doesn't really answer the question, I guess, but at least part of it, it says it's not the same thing as intentional killing. I think she had her hand up.
Just
Yeah.
a question about what to do with existing embryos and the morality of whether you can allow this to go on through in vitro fertilization in order to give the embryo life, or the opposite, is it natural death to thaw embryos which were never meant to be conceived outside the womb naturally?
Yeah, well, the question was about what to do with embryos who have already been conceived outside the womb and maybe are frozen in these labs. There's a big debate about that. My position is that I don't see anything intrinsically immoral about implanting an embryo that has already been produced. Now, I mean, planning to produce an embryo outside the womb for these, that I think is morally wrong, or objectively morally wrong. So I think in vitro fertilization is objectively morally wrong. But of course, your question was, the thing's already been done, and you have this frozen embryo. To me, I think, I know there's a big debate about this, but I think that adopting a human embryo, implanting it, is not morally required of the woman to do that. But if she does that, it seems to be a heroic act, not anything intrinsically immoral. I would put it as, it seems to me, analogous to nursing the child. The child is already fully produced. It's a full child. It's just that the child is an immature child. Now then, I would say that would be morally okay.
What about the thawing of the
The thawing.
As explained as that it is a natural death, it's allowing the embryo to go through a natural death.
Suppose you, in other words, is the question here is it right to thaw?
Is that a natural?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, well, if we can't keep him alive, yeah, I mean, it depends. That's a tough one. I don't know the answer to that. There, the question is sort of, it's the traditional question about are these extraordinary means of preserving their life? I mean, there's a cost there. Talk about, okay, the question was about whether it's morally right to keep them frozen or whether it's morally right to thaw them. When you thaw them, they're going to die. All right. I don't, it's like pulling the plug on someone, pulling them off the ventilator. I don't think there's a clear-cut universal answer to that. It depends on the cost of the ventilator. Similarly, it depends on the cost of keeping them preserved in this frozen state and all of the other bad aspects of that too. Yeah. One more question. Yeah. One more question. How would your question is, how would a philosopher refute my argument? Is that your question? How did they respond? I haven't had a formal debate with someone, with this argument that came back, except in writing. That second objection that I listed there, that the human being comes to be, I came to be at one point, but I became valuable at a later point, was from an article that a philosopher did write against the book that I wrote on abortion. And in the book I wrote on abortion, I think I didn't bring out that step. And so in responding to his article, I think refined the argument somewhat. So I don't know if that helps. In other words, all I can say is that I tried to incorporate my answer to their answer in this argument. And I don't know what their answer to this argument would be. They might have some answer, and then I'd have to go back to the drawing board. I don't know. But that's where we are with it. That step two was an objection to an argument I had given, and I trust everyone understands I thoroughly refuted that. Okay, thank you.